Hello, and thank you for tuning into Late Night Hockey. I'm your host, Steven Psihogios, and on tonight's episode, I've got a very special guest. I'm joined by Justin Cuthbert, Maple Leafs reporter and Yahoo Sports NHL editor. And Justin, I've been working with Justin for a few years now. When I was an intern at Yahoo, Justin was always great to me, and I picked up a lot of what I know from writing from Justin. He's been a huge influence. Just as a little bit of a background on Justin, butter him up a little bit before I question him before we start today's episode. But Justin, thanks so much for joining the show today.
It's a pleasure being on with you, Stevie Buckets. I don't know if your Yahoo personas are like out there in the world, but I just can't call you Steven Psihogios. Like it's just not in my bones. So if I call you Stevie Buckets, it's just going to happen. And I guess it already has. But I'm trying to make it seem like this. I mean, it's late night hockey. That's the show, right? Late night hockey. I mean, we're filming in the day here, right?
We're trying to make it look
it looks like I'm trying to make it seem like it's nighttime, and I got the ring light here, but let's just take it under the hood. And we're filming a little earlier, but this is going to come and premiere at night. But I appreciate you having me on, and I've enjoyed watching you all year because it's not easy. The content game isn't easy in itself, but staying up, watching multiple games every night and filming every night and churning out content like you had, that's a serious commitment. I commend you for it.
I appreciate it, Justin. Yeah, it's been fun though. I've enjoyed it. It's definitely helped me as far as covering and watching every team and getting an idea of how they play. Wednesdays are just a gem. I don't know why I picked Wednesday and Saturday, just landed on those two dates. But Wednesday, not only do we typically get the 5 o'clock games, those have been where most of the 5 o'clock games are, but a lot of the 10:30 games have also been on Wednesdays. Love the San Jose Sharks for booking those 10:30 games. Love to keep me up a little bit later, but I can't complain. It's been good, and it's been something to keep me busy during this time. But before we get into the playoff breakdown on today's episode, which is what we're going to center everything around, I gotta question you on something, because you questioned me on something on social media, on Twitter. I put up my list. I put up my list of the series I'm looking most forward to. And your response was a GIF of Ron Burgundy saying, "I don't believe you." What about my list was hard to fathom for you, Justin?
Well, I will say that the 10:30 San Jose, those games were like when California was good, like it was easy to stay up for those games. Now it's just like the worst teams in the league seem to be on the latest, which makes it even more difficult and your job a little bit more difficult. But you're right, I don't believe you. I think it's a crock of your list of series that you're looking most forward to. I understand that you're a purist and that you love, like, it doesn't matter about the market and so on and so forth. But you have Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers last on your list of 8 first-round series versus the Winnipeg Jets, last on what you're looking forward to the most. I mean, I get that you have time for everyone, but if you're a hockey purist, you're seeing finally the greatest player in the world on the back half of what was maybe the greatest offensive season we've seen in our lifetimes, and that doesn't interest you at all. Like, I want to know how that makes any sense.
I just think it's not going to be a good series. Like, I think from an entertainment standpoint, it just won't be that entertaining, if I'm being honest. Winnipeg.
How is watching he's the greatest entertainer in the game, Stevie.
I agree wholeheartedly. And he is the most dominant player in the game. But he's just going to dominate the Winnipeg Jets for however long that series is. He scored more points against the Jets in the regular season than any other team in that North Division. And I just have not liked what I've seen from Winnipeg. I just think they're walking into this playoff series like a doormat. Like, I just don't see where Winnipeg is going to make this an intriguing series. And I'll save a little bit more of that for when we get into it. We'll start with the North Division too. So
I'll just say, I mean, the Connor McDavid beating down the Winnipeg Jets for 4 straight games, if that is the worst case scenario in terms of like competitiveness, and I guess that's what you like the most, is just a competitive game, which is fine. But like, Predators Hurricanes isn't going to be competitive. What's more exciting about Predators Hurricanes than Jets Oilers? It should be a similar beatdown, except one team, the Carolina Hurricanes, can have a lot of trouble scoring goals. Doesn't mean the game's going to be more competitive. It's just going to be a lot of frustration than the Oilers, who are going to do the same thing, but actually probably fill the net. And if they don't fill the net, it's because Connor Hellebuyck's so great, and he would be the great equalizer and makes that series even more competitive. I just, Predators Hurricanes, Islanders, Penguins. Islanders have to be last on every list in terms of entertainment.
I, you know
Even
what?
Blues Avalanche.
You know what?
Like Blues Avalanche is the same as Oilers Jets, except it's Connor McDavid versus Nathan McKinnon, who might not even play because he's hurt right now. Come on, Stevie.
I'm all about, for me, I'm all about, like you said, the competitive games. And I think those series are going to end up being more competitive than this one. I do not have high expectations. And we'll start with the North Division. And you know what? We're going to start with the Leafs and the Habs, but let's start here with the Jets and the Oilers. Justin, what is your prediction for this series and how do you see it playing out?
I could contradict everything I've been saying and say Oilers in 4, but I don't think it's going to happen that way. I mean, Mike Smith's been so good this year, but to believe that he's going to be in a position where he doesn't lose one of 4 games for the Oilers, maybe I'm a little skeptical that will happen. Like I just feel like there's an opportunity for the Jets to steal games in this series, I think, just based on the fact that they have such a talented offensive core and they're playing against what would not be considered the best defensive team in the league, even though they've made many strides this year, it seems. And obviously goaltending has been, something out of the ordinary, and you never know when that next shoe is going to drop. And Mike Smith, who has had this outlier season, suddenly reverts to the goaltender that we've come to expect in the last decade. But then the other side of that is the Connor Hellebuyck factor, where he can steal games by himself. Now, I think it's going to be more difficult for him to steal games against the Oilers because it's not like a Vegas Thatcher Demko situation where you're just going to put 40, decent looks at the net and a goaltender can just stymie all that. This is Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl who do things, who elevate it beyond just like a bunch of looks at the net. Like these are high grade scoring chances from 2 of the best offensive players in the entire league. So chances from the Oilers, or chances that the Oilers produce, are probably not equal to chances that a normal team produces. So I think Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are going to get theirs. That's just how Oilers games are. But if Connor Hellebuyck can stop the rest of it and he can be on the top of his game, he can limit the damage a little bit. There's no promise that the Oilers are going to be able to do that themselves. So I can see some high scoring games, and I can see an event where, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl just aren't able in a few games to outscore the entire Winnipeg Jets team, which is still a talented offensive unit. So I still think the Edmonton Oilers are going to win. I think they're the vastly superior team. I think the Winnipeg Jets have really disappointed this year. I don't think they've shown a commitment to being a great team when the possibility perhaps was there. Their stagnancy at the deadline was very disappointing because it's clear that they have issues, but it's clear that they also had potential. And I think they've wasted that potential. So I'll say Edmonton in 6 games in the end. It could be a little bit quicker than that. But again, the Oilers have failed to make the transition to postseason hockey before as recent as 8 months ago or 10 months ago when they arrived at the bubble and a bad Chicago Blackhawks team beat them. So you never know how it's going to look when it all changes. And it's been basically glorified shitting for the Edmonton Oilers over the last 3 weeks or so. So maybe it doesn't, snap of the fingers, but right now, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are at a level where I just don't think the Jets can stop them, and it's the perfect opportunity for them to run wild. And I don't know about you, Stevie, but that's entertaining to me.
I'm not saying it might be entertaining. I'm just not looking forward to it because what I see with Winnipeg is I see a Jets team that, you mentioned that they are very stagnant at the trade deadline. I don't think there was any trade in the works that could have fixed their biggest issue, which is the fact that they don't have a number 1 defenseman. There was really, David Savard's a nice player, but he's not.
Matthias Ekholm, but they just decided not to, right? Like, I get it. I guess you can give them. I just think you have to try. You got to try.
I agree. They should have done more than just bring in Jordy Bend, especially when you have a player like Mike Riley from Ottawa who goes to Boston for a third. Exactly. I think there definitely could have been something in the works, but I don't know if it still fixes the biggest issue. And when I look at McDavid and Draisaitl, they're running wild over these defenses because there's simply not a defenseman good enough or a defense pairing good enough in this division to keep them in check. And I don't know, even at the trade deadline, if Winnipeg could have mustered something, because I think Josh Morrissey has taken a step back this year. And I also think Pionk has been fine. He's been good, but it's been kind of
He's not that type of guy.
No, he's not that type of guy. And we've seen like snippets of him getting under McDavid's skin, but it really hasn't worked because, McDavid's put up more points against the Jets than anyone else. So I've got Edmonton in 5. I'm giving Winnipeg maybe 1 game with Connor Hellebuyck to steal one, but they've been the worst team since April 1st of all the playoff teams, Winnipeg. I just don't see how they can make it happen against an Edmonton team that's actually looking a little bit better right now.
I know this isn't a gambling show, but I know that you like to throw around lunch money, as you call it. Actually,
Yes.
I guess it is a little bit of a gambling show because you were waving pro lines at everyone's face at the start of the year, at least.
Yeah.
But this is the one that I don't really want to touch because I'm not sure exactly. I'm not sure what the Oilers are going to look like for certain. I know what one line's going to look like, maybe two if they spread it out, which is another potential issue unto itself. We don't know if the Oilers are just at their best when they play those two guys together. But I just don't know if the Jets can squeeze a few more games out of it. And then the price on the Oilers is just too steep.
Yeah, I agree. I think as far as if you're wagering on it, I don't know if there's an attractive bet out there on Edmonton right now. Just the way both these teams have trend, I think that's kind of affected.
Admit it. That's why you're not as interested in it, because you don't have any lunch money on it, Steve.
I do not have lunch money on this series. You're right. I do not have any lunch money. And another series that I probably won't end up having any lunch money on, mainly for the same reasons, is Maple Leafs Habs. And the reason why is I don't see any scenario. And, we've heard this when it comes to the Maple Leafs in the playoffs, especially last year against Columbus in the qualifying round. But I just don't see any scenario where the Montreal Canadiens can beat the Maple Leafs in a 4-out-of-7 series. You've covered this team very closely. Do you see any way, shape, or form the Maple Leafs could squander this series to Montreal?
No, I really don't. The mental aspect of all this is the only thing that gives me pause or anyone pause. And I think that's just a product of being around this team for as long as you and I have been. I mean, they have clearly emerged as the superior team in the North Division. I'm actually fascinated by how good of a job Kyle Dubas has done. It wasn't long ago, honestly, at the end of last season, this team was kind of in shambles a little bit. Like, obviously, they had such a talented core. They had, a couple guys like Jason Spezza who you knew you were going to be back, and guys that you thought you at least had some value in. But this team is completely different, and it's been turned over to such an extent that it really is remarkable looking back on what they looked like at the end of the last season. And it's even more remarkable looking back what they looked at the start of this season. Like, Kyle Dubas clearly had the best team in the North Division. I think it's been pretty much in cement since the Montreal Canadiens fired Claude Julien, which team was truly the best. And Kyle Dubas hasn't sat on his hands even in the slightest. Like, he's managed to make this team even better. A move like Riley Nash for a 7th round pick, who could be the guy who gives them the shutdown center that they've been looking for, that they've been trying to figure out and configure on that third line since the very start of the year. If they get him for absolutely nothing and it works out the way they think it's going to work out, I mean, that is a chess versus checkers move from them. And just an example of how they've continued to make this team better, even when they've lost guys through the waiver system. I mean, the worst move that Kyle Dubas made in the summer, I think, was signing Jimmy Vesey to just under $1 million, and another team just took that problem off their hands. Like, the build has been spectacular for this team, and they are clearly ready for the postseason and clearly should be favored in a matchup with the Montreal Canadiens, who have a lot of issues. Like, they have issues in goal. They've got their best player, the guy that makes it all work, is Brendan Gallagher. We don't know if we're going to see him. It seems like they are totally and wholly dependent on Nick Suzuki playing at the very top of his game for them to be a competitive team. It just seems like he drives all of that. And it's a lot to put on a guy who's so young. And it's a lot to put on a guy who's going to be playing. The best matchup he's going to see is the shutdown center that the Leafs think they have, and the shutdown line they think they have with Riley Nash and Ilya Mikheyev. And I guess it would be, who am I missing here? Who would be the other shutdown guy? Mikheyev, Nash.
And,
anyway, it'll come to me. Kerfoot.
Yeah.
So the Leafs have optimized themselves here. Montreal has not. And the only thing that could make you think that Toronto isn't going to get it done is their history, and it simply isn't relevant right now. Just like it's not relevant that the Montreal Canadiens beat the Leafs back in 1979. It just isn't relevant. This team is just built differently this year, and I do have a bet under 5.5 in terms of total games in the series. I think is a good one. But yeah, I just think the Leafs are going to cruise here. And honestly, if I would describe it in one word, what I think this series is going to be, I think it's going to be cathartic for both the franchise and the fans.
What'd you get the number at there for under 5.5? If you don't mind me asking.
I'll have to check. You can
Check.
give me your spiel, and I'll
For
let you know.
For sure, because I like that too. I've got the Leafs in 4 in this series. I don't even give Montreal one game. I think now with Toronto, you have a team, like you've mentioned, the history, which I think could potentially be used as motivation if you want to go down narrative avenue. But I think they could use that as motivation. And when I've seen these two teams play, again, I just don't see where Montreal is gonna outdo what the Maple Leafs can offer. And I understand defensively, if you want to say the Habs are maybe a little bit more loaded defensively than the Leafs, sure. But what the difference is offensively between Toronto and Montreal, it can be covered by leaps and bounds. It's huge. So I really do think Toronto wins this series in 4 games. I'm assuming Jack Campbell will start for the Maple Leafs. I don't know if they've confirmed that. I haven't seen anywhere where it's been confirmed whether it'll be he or Anderson. But I think
it'll be Campbell. It'll be Campbell for sure.
I agree. And I know there's a back-to-back in this series as well, if I'm not mistaken, which
3 and 4.
3 and 4. So you'll probably see Anderson get at least one of those games. But I think
and I think that is a perfect opportunity to get his feet wet a little bit, because you have the excuse built in to do it. There's nothing controversial about it. You get Anderson in, maybe he completes the first series win you've had in 2 decades or close to. And that would be a big thing for them. It would be a big thing for the team. Another galvanizing situation. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no worries. No, and I'm in full agreement with you there. I think that would be the perfect time, especially if you win the first 2 at home. You can pencil them in for game 3 or 4, and you're up 2-0 already. So I like Toronto. Yeah, we think if they're able to take the first 2 at home. I like the Maple Leafs in this series. I don't really see where the upset can come from, and this to me, I think the East, the North Division, as far as the playoff matchups go, the intrigue with the Leafs and Habs for me is the historical nature of these two teams. But really, on the ice, I don't see this being a very close series.
So, just the historical aspect, just to clarify, more interesting than Connor McDavid.
Yes.
Okay. It's plus 120, minus
plus
5.5, plus 120, plus money on the Leafs winning in 4 and 5, or 4 or 5. Sorry.
That's a good number. All right. I might have to check that one out. That's a good number.
Run over to the laptop.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording now. We'll come back after.
We'll be back in a second.
Yeah, exactly. A brief pause. But we'll move over to the Central Division now. And again, you have kind of talked about my excitement for this series, which I'm not overly excited for. It was still number 7 on the list. I had Predators and Hurricanes as my number 7 most intriguing series. What do you think about this series? I think it's going to be a 7-game series. What are your thoughts between these two teams?
I'm high on the Carolina Hurricanes. I really am. I will admit that I've neglected to tune in to Nashville too much, because I think it was easy to write them off early on. We're talking about blowing up the team before the deadline, and then they catch a little bit of fire. UC Saros leads them to results that they probably don't deserve, and here we are. They came in 4th place in what was a seriously top-heavy division in the Central. So I think there's a degree of fortune in which they've arrived here. But you know what? They're playing very well down the stretch. But the Carolina Hurricanes are one of those baseline performing teams where it's steady, it's consistent, it's shift over shift, it's dominance of the puck, shots, shot attempts, everything and the like. And eventually that grinds you down. Now the problems historically have been that they can't score, or they can't use those shot attempts to score at an average rate. And if they did it at an average rate, that they'd be better off than most teams. But they struggle in that regard sometimes. And UC Saros, I guess, presents a problem in that way. And you're probably not sold completely on the Carolina goaltending situation. I think it is very interesting that, among the favorites, or at least some of the top, teams that have won division, so on and so forth, the Leafs included, the goaltending situation is a little bit of a question. It's a question for Carolina. It's a question for Vegas, even though they have 2 number 1 options. It's a question for the Leafs, who are they going to get Freddie in? Can Jack Campbell play every night like this? And Carolina is in that as well, with Alex Nedeljkovic, Petr Mrazek, James Reimer, wherever you want to go. I'm not even sure where they're going to go, but Alex Nedeljkovic has played very, very well for them. So can he be that guy who helps the team overcome the fact that they don't score as much as they should with the amount of control of the puck that they have? Maybe, but I think they're in a better position this year than they have been in most years. And I think they're in a better position in the first round this year than they have been in previous years, because I just don't think the Hurricanes can keep up with them shift after shift. I think Carolina is a live I don't want to call them underdog, but a live player for the Stanley Cup. I think they're a very, very good team. I think they're just a band of underappreciated players. And as a hockey purist yourself, I'm not telling you, or I'm not giving you anything new here, but I for that reason, I certainly favor them in round one, and I think I'm going to take them in round two, no matter who they play, if they do indeed get there. I'm a big fan of the Carolina Hurricanes, and if we're still talking bets, I mean, we've sort of opened it up to this. I think I put a bet on them plus 350 to make the Stanley Cup final, and it might not be the best value, but I have a lot of faith in Carolina this year.
Yeah, sometimes you have to pay up. I think the Hurricanes can get to the Cup final, and I actually think whoever they play in round two will be easier, or maybe not easier, but it'll be a shorter series than round one. I have this one going to 7 games. Since
Okay.
UC Saros returned on March 18th, the Nashville Predators have the highest points percentage of any team in the Central Division. Better than Carolina, better than Florida, better than Tampa Bay. And with Carolina, I'm not necessarily concerned about goaltending. I would be a little bit if they go to Mrazek right away, because I think it's clear Nedeljkovic has done enough to be the starter there. He's someone who actually has like a fair amount of pedigree as well. He played for the U.S. at the World Juniors. He's always been a good goalie at the junior level, even at the AHL level. He was solid, and now at the NHL, he's doing it again. Which those are important things I look at when I look to see whether or not a goalie is it's more or less a fluke at the National Hockey League level. What I'm worried about with Carolina is winning games on the road in this series. Nashville's going to have 70% capacity for their home games. Rod Brind'Amour already talked about this potentially being a factor. And if you watch these last 2 games between Carolina and Nashville, and, maybe it was harder to gauge Carolina's interest in these games because they were kind of cemented in that top seed, that crowd was really loud. And that was only at 40%. They had 40% for the last 2 games. Now it's going to be almost double at nearly 70% capacity with over 12,000 fans. I think it could be hard for Carolina to win games on the road, especially going up a goalie as hot as UC Saros, who, since he's come back from injury, has been the best goalie. Ultimately, though, I've given the Hurricanes the win in 7 games because I think their center depth is what's going to propel them. Nashville, the difference between Carolina offensively, Nashville offensively, I think is very big, and not even a 12,000 plus crowd can make up for that difference. And the Hurricanes were the only team in the league that had 3 centers and 3 pure centers. I look at the NHL stats section. Sometimes you filter by center, and it's got like Jonathan Marchessault, who's played on the wing all year. But if you go 3 pure centers, Carolina's the only team with 3 centers that had 35 plus points. I think down the middle is where they'll have a lot of success against Nashville, and that's why I've got Carolina in 7 games.
Yeah, you make a good point about the fans, although I don't know exactly how it's going to affect teams. Like, I think we can look ahead to, the potential, NHL semifinals. I guess that's what they're calling it, the NHL semifinals this year. And like the fact that a Canadian team is going to have to basically play, we think, in a ultra bland environment that, might not even be their actual home based on the cross-border travel, and what that might mean for advantage or disadvantage. But I think right away, if you're Carolina, played in front of empty barns all year, and you go into a place like Nashville, I think that might just be the shot of adrenaline that they need to just play their best, like this, in the same way that Nashville might play their best with that shot. Like, I get the "you suck" chance might get under a rookie goaltender's skin, maybe. I don't really know, but I always think home ice is overblown in the NHL, and I just think that's going to be a welcome sight for everybody to have, the atmosphere that some barns are going to be able to provide this year. Yeah, it could be a thing for Nashville. Could also be a thing for Carolina.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it too. So both of us got Carolina emerging. I see this being just a little bit more of a series. The next series we're going to talk about in the Central Division, the one that topped my list as far as entertainment factor goes.
Number one.
and it is even ahead of my beloved Bruins. I kept it even ahead of my beloved Bruins. I think this is going to be a rough and tough series, and I think it's going to be one-sided, to be honest, between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. Justin, a lot of people I've seen are picking the Bolts to win this series. I've got Florida in 5 games. How do you see this one shaping up?
Florida in 5. Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite the take. I think this is, if I had to choose a series to go the longest, this would be it. I think another reason why I like Carolina so much and I was willing to bet on them to go to the Stanley Cup final at the number I did is the fact that I think the Lightning and Panthers are going to beat the crap out of each other. I think you said it right. I just think they're going to take significant and considerable bites out of each other in this first round series because I don't think did the players really care that this is the first time Tampa and Florida have played. Maybe some of them do. I guess it's another thing to like get you fired up, but I don't know if that matters as much as the fact that they don't seem to like each other. They seem pretty evenly matched. They have the cast of characters that's going to provide that sort of physicality that's needed. I think Tampa might be looking for, some sort of motivation. Like it's hard to get it going again. I think we've seen a team like Washington recently when they were following up their Stanley Cup season. It looked like they just couldn't find that fourth gear, or they were not willing to dig in like they needed to in order to get past Carolina a couple of years ago, and they just didn't in a Game 7. So I think Tampa could go through the motions a little bit. Not to say that they can't win the Stanley Cup. I think they're certainly one of the few teams that can, but you never know exactly how it's going to look. And the fact that Victor Hedman is, we know he's dealing with something that's going to require surgical intervention, and we know that he's the guy that makes this team click more than anything, more so than Nikita Kucherov returning, more so than a healthy Steven Stamkos, more so than Braden Point being the two-way force and the guy that just sets everything in motion for Tampa Bay. It's all about Victor Hedman in terms of running the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's no secret that he's had a bad last month of the season, and there's no secret how that's correlated with Tampa Bay having a difficult final month of the season. So I think that's an equalizer for this sort of series, and I think that's a reason why Florida is certainly live. But I think there's too much talent to ignore from the Tampa Bay side, and this is another one that I don't feel strong enough either way to put money down. And I came in wanting to put money on Florida rather, but it's so close in the odds that it's just like, am I really overlooking the Tampa Bay Lightning for even money? That's tough. So I still think Tampa is going to find its way through, but I think it's going to get to the end of this potentially 7-game series and just not have the confidence that they can go another 3 rounds after it. And I think that's a feather in the cap, I think, of the Florida Panthers by the end. Certainly, I don't feel as strongly as you do, but this is, in terms of excitement, intrigue, it's up there. It's still Florida and Tampa for me, so that like the historical aspect doesn't quite get me going as much to put it as number 1, but this should be a hell of a series.
Yeah, and if those last couple of games of the season were just any little taster of how it's going to go, like you said, it's going to be physical, it's going to be rough, they're going to beat the crap out of each other. The reason why I like Florida is, and I understand Tampa Bay's getting Nikita Kucherov back, they're going to get Steven Stamkos back. They just look like a team that is playing fatigued right now. A lot of their top offensive players, Andre Palat, Braden Point, Anthony Cirelli. Anthony Cirelli's only got 1 point in his last 23 games. A lot of their top offensive guys aren't playing very well. And when I see Tampa Bay, I look also between the pipes at Andre Vasilevsky. He's only had 1 quality start in his last 7 starts. And that playoff run, that Stanley Cup run wasn't too long ago. Like that was only
it was, it's hard to turn it around 12 months ago. They won the Stanley Cup 8 months ago. It is a big difference.
Totally. It's a huge difference. And it's not like he got a lot of nights off. He played the second most games of any goalie in the league. So your best defenseman is not 100%. B, also Ryan McDonough, who's a big time shot blocker, isn't 100% either. He's been playing through some injuries. And I just think they are rolling into this series very much susceptible to a quick upset by the Panthers. I think Florida, they didn't have a long playoff run. They are a very loaded team. I like what Bill Zito's done as far as additions go. You look like a guy like Patrick Hornquist should have a huge impact on this team in the playoffs. I think Sam Bennett's another playoff type guy. We've seen him play some of his best hockey in the playoffs with Calgary. I just think you add it all together. They're the hottest team entering the playoffs too. They've won 6 straight, Florida. I just think you're banking on a lot if you're Tampa Bay to get Steven Stamkos, who's often injured, back in fully healthy. Nikita Kucherov, who hasn't played a game all season long, and your top defenseman is going through something that, like you said, will likely require surgery. I just don't see it with Tampa Bay, other than the fact that they're the Stanley Cup champions. Mm-hmm. I don't see where else that they could potentially beat Florida, who will have home ice in this series as well.
Yeah, I've been trying to resist the urge to take into account too much what's happened over the last 2 weeks, aside from the Hedman thing. I think that's not associated with how they performed in terms of in-game situations, rather. Because I see a reason why Tampa would let its foot off the gas for the last couple of weeks. I think they felt that they couldn't win the division title. They knew they were going to be playing, and it's just in your mind as a veteran team that, okay, let's conserve a little bit of the gas tank here. Whereas Florida, we certainly want to come second. We're a young team that's still trying to prove itself. We're still, like, every night is it very important. So I feel like the ambitions over the last 2 weeks may have been different with those two teams. I did say I didn't have a bet. I actually do have a bet. I bet over 5.5 games. You won't like that because you got Florida in 5. But I don't think it's going to be easy for Tampa. And I can't see Florida just walking away with, getting 4 of 5 against Andrei Vasilevsky. It just seems like a stretch to me. So I think I laid the juice a little bit to get that number or to get that bet down. But I just think it's going to be a grueling affair. And I can't imagine it's over in 5. I just can't.
We'll see. Sergei Bobrovsky has done it before against the Tampa Bay Lightning in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, if Florida had it their way, I don't think he'd be even dressing. I think he'd be in the press box.
No, I agree with you completely. I think Chris Driedger has been the best goalie on that team, and maybe Spencer Knight number 2. But, the optics of that aren't very great. You got a $10 million guy on the bench. But nonetheless, let's go to the East Division, which I think is the second most competitive division. Strip away the Central. I just think Nashville's surge has made that a bit more of a formidable top 4. But you look at this first round series here between Pittsburgh and the New York Islanders. The Penguins have had the Islanders number all year long, 6-2 record against the Isles in the regular season. It's really been a tale of two stories with these teams. You've had Pittsburgh really turn their season around after bringing on Ron Hextall and Brian Burke, and you've seen the Islanders do the opposite after losing Anders Lee, their captain. Do you think this series is one that's going to go the distance, be a 6-game, 7-game barn burner? It's hard to say barn burner with the Islanders in a series, but do you think it could go the distance, or do you think Pittsburgh kind of has their way with an Islanders team that is looking a little suspicious entering the postseason?
Yeah, I think there are many potential outcomes for this. Yeah, I guess there would be many potential outcomes. Maybe not, I'm not going to say everything can happen. I don't think Islanders can win this one very quickly. I think it's going to be a grind if they're going to win it, probably in the 7-game scenario. But I think Pittsburgh could get it done really quickly as well. So I think, it could be really difficult, and it could be, a snap of the fingers for Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh's the most fascinating team of the entire year. I mean, nothing about Brian Burke and Ron Hextall coming in should have affected the performance of this team, even in the slightest bit. And yet it's back to 2016 where the coaching change just changed everything, where one change in the management structure basically changed the entire way in which not a time-honored team, but a team that has its identity cemented for so long. We know who this team is. We know it's Crosby. We know it's Malkin. We know it's a bunch of complementary pieces that work around those two. It's been the same formula for years. And yet the coaching change one year brought this team to a new height. And this year, just bringing on 2 new guys to head the management team changed everything. This team was lucky to be even in the race, to be involved in this division when those 2 guys came on, because they had about, 2, 3, maybe 4 regulation wins through the first month of the season. Like, they were really, really struggling. They were basically only treading water by the fact that they got a bunch of loser points, losing games in overtime in a shootout. And yet they took, from that point on, I think it was February 9th, they took the division away from the Washington Capitals by the end. The Jeff Carter acquisition, I think, like many people, I was skeptical. But when you look at it now, it is a stroke of brilliance. How else are you going to – you had 2 options when you come in if you're Brian Burke and Ron Hextall. You blow it up and you try and build it again one more time around Sidney Crosby when he's at age 36, 37, or you try and get as much talent as you can into the roster as possible without making the big moves and in spending all the money you could possibly have on one or two guys. They got Jeff Carter at 50%. So you got a talent that is worth 5 million at 2.5 million or in change or whatever it is. That's exactly what they have to do or had to do to get a more talent around Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. And Jeff Carter is playing that Jordan Staal role right now as the third center and a guy who can actually create mismatches in the bottom six. I think it's changed a lot about how this team operates, and Jeff Carter has had such a positive influence from a goal scoring perspective. And I just think they're the hotter team when compared to the Islanders. I think the Islanders have been slowly eroding for the last month or so. Injuries have taken its toll, but this is also a Barry Trotz-led team. And what Barry Trotz does is he frustrates great players and great systems in high-octane offenses. So just that factor alone could have the Islanders hang around, could have the Islanders do what they've done in previous postseasons as early as last year when they went to the conference finals and lost, right? Yes. Yeah. And I think they could certainly do that to Pittsburgh. But if we're basing on performance and form right now, I think Pittsburgh blows them out of the water. And I'm on Pittsburgh. I think they're going to get through it. It could be a cinch. The Islanders could drag them into deep waters. But ultimately, I think this could be the start of another exciting playoff run around Sidney Crosby. And as a purist you are, you gotta enjoy any meaningful games involving Sidney Crosby. I know I'm in that camp.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. You gotta, especially at this point of his career, and especially with how things were going to start the year, where there were even Sidney Crosby trade rumors at one point.
It's remarkable where we came from. Yeah. It's like, is this the end of the line for Sid? Sidney Crosby could win the Hart. Well, can't win the Hart Trophy, but could be nominated for the Hart Trophy and could be, on the path to another long playoff run.
Yeah, and he propelled this team out of the gutter because Malkin missed a lot of the season. And it's always funny how that works in Pittsburgh. When one of those guys is out, the other one just elevates his game. Like the year Malkin won his Hart Trophy, there was no Sidney Crosby on the team. He missed a lot of the year with concussions.
Yeah.
So it's funny how when one guy is out, the other guy always seems to elevate his game. And Pittsburgh, to me, I've got them in 6 games in this series. I respect the Islanders because I feel like we've been here before with the Islanders where people look at this team, don't think much of it, and they give you a fight. So I've got them winning a couple of games. They've got the goaltending and they've got the defense to do so. But I'm glad you touched upon the Jeff Carter addition, because if you look at what the Islanders did at the trade deadline, they're not getting much from either of those guys. Palmieri in 17 games has got 4 points, and in 13 games, Travis Zajac has 2 points.
Mm-hmm.
Those were players that were brought in because Lou knew the Devils organization really well. Those were guys that he has interacted with. He thought could come in and make a difference, and they just haven't. So I think what Pittsburgh was able to do, adding Jeff Carter, makes a big difference and could be an X factor as to why they make a deep playoff run. Because, well, Pittsburgh isn't a team that I look at as far as a gritty sandpaper type of team. They don't have a lot of that. Adding some depth, especially down the middle of the ice, and solidifying that third center role is huge. And getting Brandon Tanev hopefully fully healthy and ready to go for the playoffs. I know he's dealt with some injuries. I think he's another guy that could potentially emerge as a key player for that Penguins team in the postseason. So I'm with you. I think Pittsburgh wins, but I do think the Islanders make it a bit of a series and look better than what we've seen from them so far.
That's just what they do, but I don't think we should neglect. I mean, it was easy to forget that they lost Devon Toews for nothing at the start of the year when they started pretty hot. But look at what Devon Toews is doing in Colorado. That's not a small thing. It's a big deal to a team like the New York Islanders, who depends so heavily on that tight defensive structure. That was one of the guys that could make it all work, and he's not on the team anymore.
No, and while I still like the Pulock-Pelech little combination they got there on defense, I think that's a good shutdown combo. I do think they're missing it as far as you look at maybe the I guess the bottom three. Yeah, puck moving defenseman. I think they could use someone like that. I know that they've tried with Pulock on the power play, and it just hasn't worked the same way it worked with Devon Toews. So staying in the East Division, this is the number 2 as far as the series I'm looking most forward to, the Bruins and Capitals. And I've seen, surprisingly, a lot of experts picking the Capitals to win this series. And I say it surprisingly. Yeah, like I was watching Sportsnet the other day. They were talking about the Capitals. I've seen a lot of people pick the Caps. I think Boston is the team that is on the upwards trajectory in this division ever since really the addition of Taylor Hall solidified that second line. But I've actually been surprised. There've been so many people picking Washington. Maybe it's just me and where I've been seeing things, and maybe, that is exactly what I'm doing. Maybe I am seeing things, but I think Boston is the team that looks a little bit more fuller and it looks a little bit more complete than Washington with the playoffs starting now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if you look at this Boston team, obviously the defense is not quite as good as it once was. But this is the deepest forward group I think we've seen from Boston in this run of years where they have been legitimate contenders for the Stanley Cup. I think the last 5 years, they probably played more playoff games than anyone, and it's because they've had such a great team and such a good core. But what they've missed in that many of the years is that secondary scoring unit. And with David Krejci had a terrible start to the year, at least in terms of production. I think he had like 2 goals through the first 3 months of the season.
Yeah,
Just not much coming out of that second line, right?
Yeah,
And
I think he had like no goals for like the first 19, 20 games of the year, to be honest. I think he was held off the goal sheet at least.
Yeah, so what they've been doing forever is relying on that top line, and that's, maybe not as sound of a strategy because David Pastrnak hasn't quite had the year in which at least he had last year and, followed the same trajectory. But Brad Marchand's been at the very top of his game. He's going to finish third, I think, in scoring, which is the highest of his career. Patrice Bergeron is still Patrice Bergeron. I don't care how old this guy is. He's going to continue to get it done into his 40s, I think. Like he's just a marvel. And that line is still great. But what's different about Boston this year is the fact that they have Craig Smith and Taylor Hall in the mix and to go along with David Krejci, who's always been on an island a little bit. They also have Jake DeBrusk. Like they have a bunch of middle six forwards now who would be considered plus in comparison to other teams. So what they can offer from a forward perspective, I think, supersedes what Washington brings. I think Washington has trouble with the fact that Alexander Ovechkin seems banged up. I think Evgeny Kuznetsov has been a problem all year for reasons that are not, all related to hockey, maybe some related to attitude, maybe the fact that, if COVID is affecting any team, it seems like, the limitations and everything that goes with it might be affecting Washington more than others. And maybe there's a commitment issue with Evgeny Kuznetsov. It just seems like there's a lot of noise and things aren't really going that well with Washington, who stumbled a little bit down the stretch, or at least coughed up the division to Pittsburgh. I also have concerns in net with Washington, who just have 2 young guys who are going to be, matched up against Tuukka Rask, who is as much crap as he gets in the market. He's still the best goalie in this series. And I think their backup is even, maybe more suited for, big time playoff games, even though he's a rookie, than what we see on the other side from Washington. So I think there's a lot of red flags with the Washington Capitals. And I think they're catching the Boston Bruins at the very worst time because they seem like they just got an injection of life with Taylor Hall, who I've sort of glossed over. I mean, I mentioned him, but this is still Taylor Hall, and he's playing now in his secondary function for the Boston Bruins. I think Boston's got it cooking. I like them to come out of the division. I just think they're going to catch Washington at a bad time, and I think it might honestly be over pretty quick.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. And I'm really happy you brought up the situation between the pipes, because I feel like people have just glossed over the fact that Vitek Vanacek has a 908 save percentage this year, which is nothing, to pat yourself on the back about. But even when you look at the splits, he's dominated Buffalo and he's dominated the Islanders, 2 teams that are definitely not offensive stalwarts.
Yep.
But against every other team in this division, he has a 905 save percentage against or less. So I'm a little concerned. And even Ilya Samsonov has spent some time on the COVID protocol list lately too. So with Washington, I don't know. And not only has Ovechkin been banged up, John Carlson's missed some time. Even Nicholas Backstrom dealt with a lower body injury. You brought up Kuznetsov. I just think this is a bad place or a wrong place at the wrong time situation for Washington. Even a guy like Tom Wilson just took a pretty vicious knee to knee the other night as well. Yeah. So who knows how? I mean, he came back the next period, but who knows exactly where he lies as far as health goes. Boston, really, they've gotten everyone back. Brandon Carlo was the one player, probably the biggest piece that was missing some time, and he's back in the lineup. And like you mentioned, they're just cooking on all cylinders. Taylor Hall looks like a former first overall pick. And I think that is the biggest compliment you can give him in the way he's playing right now. He looks like someone with that draft pedigree, someone who was a Hart Trophy winner. So I just think the Bruins win this one. I'm giving it 6 games. I think Washington's able to muster a couple of wins, and they get a couple at home, but I just think Boston, the way they're playing right now, it'll be a rough series. And I don't know if Boston, we talk about the Bruins historically being this rough and tough team. I don't think that's their game this series. I don't think that's the style they should be looking to play. I think they've got the skill to outclass the Capitals in that category. So give me Boston in 6 games.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick. I will say about these two teams is they are two of the stronger teams in terms of identity. Like Boston is like, you know who they are. You mentioned they're not as physical anymore, but there's still that team that is built around that top line, that believes, that has, that sort of it factor about them. They've always had that, right? And Washington's another team that they seem to play for each other. They seem to have a really strong bond. I think the TJ Oshie thing really underscored that. Like, this is a team. They care for each other. These teams, I think they have that team aspect, the thing that the Leafs are trying to cultivate. I think the Bruins and the Capitals already have it. I think winning does, puts you in the situation where you can find that. But that is another interesting thing. I think there's belief on both sides. I just think the Boston Bruins are the better team.
I'm in full agreement. And brought up TJ Oshie. He's also going through some injury concerns right now. I know he's skated.
They're limping in.
He skated before their practice. It looks like he'll be fine, but not 100%. It's just another player added to that list. Now we'll move over to the West Division. And in the West, we finally figured it out. Yeah, we're getting through it. We're motoring. I don't know what the time is on this, but I'm going to say we're motoring through it. Time flies when you're having fun. But the West Division, we finally figured out how this was going to shape out last night. Colorado showed that they really didn't want to play Minnesota in round 1. They draw the St. Louis Blues. Ryan O'Reilly today came out with a comment that he predicts the Blues to pull off the upset over the Avalanche. And as much as I like Ryan O'Reilly, and he seems like the type of player that, you'll follow him through a brick wall, I don't know if the Blues are going to beat this Colorado Avalanche team. In fact, I don't think they will. I think Colorado right now, I know I talked about Florida, technically being the hottest team entering the playoffs, winning 6 games in a row. But I think if you look even further, this is the hottest team entering the playoffs right now.
Yeah, they're not the healthiest team entering the playoffs right now, but their win over the Los Angeles Kings, or the 2 wins that they had over the Los Angeles Kings, yesterday and the day before that, could be perhaps the difference between winning and losing a Stanley Cup. I think Colorado did itself a huge favor by drawing the St. Louis Blues in the first round. And that, leads us to the matchup here. Is the talent dearth between these two teams is huge. It is huge. I think St. Louis will be a nuisance. I think they're going to be very physical. I think they're going to take a bite out of Colorado in the end. But the potential they have versus the potential the Minnesota Wild have in terms of, upset, taking it into deep waters, I don't think it's quite the same. St. Louis Blues team isn't the same team that won a couple years ago. Just watching them over the last few nights, they played really well. But who are we leaning on? We're leaning on Ryan O'Reilly, great player. We're leaning on David Perron, point per game, first since Pavel Demitra did it, 17, 18 years ago, which is pretty crazy, but it's true. It came in a shortened season. But David Perron isn't scaring the Colorado Avalanche, who have Mikko Rantanen and hopefully Nathan McKinnon and Andre Burakovsky and Gabriel Landeskog and Nazem Kadri and 3 Norris caliber defensemen. Well, maybe not 3, but you can see a third. You can see a third coming one day with Bowen Byram. I think he's injured right now, but at least 2. And Devontae, maybe Devontae's it. Maybe they do have 3. Maybe Devontae's in the discussion for some. So I just think the talent discrepancy is huge. I think St. Louis can play playoff hockey. I think they could sort of throw themselves into any mix and be competitive. And I think that's going to be true against probably the best team in the league. But eventually the talent is going to win out, just as it did against the LA Kings the other night. The Kings and the Blues are not on the same level. But what happened in that game is it was a little frustrating early. Kings scored a goal. And then all of a sudden, in the snap of the fingers, the talent that just dwarfs everybody else with Colorado, it shone through. And it's going to shine through eventually. It might get a little dirty at times, but Colorado put itself in a great position by getting St. Louis in round 1, because they should get by them pretty simply, while Vegas and Minnesota beat the crap out of each other for the right to play them in the next round. So I think Colorado did itself a big favor by going out and getting those 2 wins, winning the division, winning the President's Trophy, drawing St. Louis in round 1. The teams just aren't on the same level right now, and Colorado wins.
I agree with everything you said. St. Louis will take a bite out of them. To be expected. You got Craig Berube and Steve Ott behind the bench. That's not going to be an easy team to play against. But I look at the St. Louis team, and I just see a team that doesn't have the defense it did when it won the cup. Obviously, Alex Pietrangelo, that's the big, elephant out of the room with the Blues. He's no longer there, the captain of that team. Thank you. I came up with that right now. But he's not there. They're trying to deploy Torrey Krug. He's had more defensive zone start time than at any point of his tenure with the Boston Bruins. A lot of that had to do with the fact that Colton Parayko missed a good chunk of this season as well. And that's just not how you're going to maximize what you're getting out of Torrey Krug. So to me, I just see a team that is missing a top 4 defenseman, and you're going up against a team that has a murderer's row as far as defensive lines go. You look at first, second, third pairing on Colorado, they are lethal defensively. And I just don't see St. Louis being able to keep those top guys in check. Even a guy like JT Compher, who scores a hat trick a couple nights ago. You have Tyson Yost had a big performance last night with a couple of goals. I just think this Colorado team has enough players offensively. Not only are they skilled and they're speedy, but they've got size. Like, this is a good blend of size, speed, and skill. I like Colorado in 5 games to beat St. Louis. I think the Blues are just entering this series a little bit overmatched. Kudos to Ryan O'Reilly for saying what he said, but I just don't see how it ends up being a series where we're looking at the Blues up maybe 2-0 or 3-1 in this series. I don't see Colorado falling behind in this series.
Well, that's what a captain does when maybe the belief isn't completely there. I will give the Blues credit. They've played really well over the last few games. They're coming into the playoffs really hot. They scored a bunch of goals against Minnesota in their last game. And you look at that game and you still think, wow, only 2 guys really scare you. It's really, if it's not O'Reilly and it's not Perron, where else is it going to come from? And then on the flip side of that,
maybe, but
Braden Shen, I guess, yeah, he's involved he would be, involved in those power play minutes as well. I guess Mike Hoffman, he's scary, he's lethal on the power play, but
that's about it.
When Colorado, when you're watching them, it looks like they can score a goal every shift. And with St. Louis, it's a lot of guys who just bring their lunch pail and try and grind you and take the puck from one zone to the other and then just change. And that's not going to cut it against Colorado because they're so lethal at every moment. And they can bring a guy like Tyson Jost from the depths of the lineup to the top of the lineup and, first line center when Nathan McKinnon is out and he scores 2 goals and he puts them in the position they're in now. It's just the talent dearth is too much.
I'm on board with you and everything you said there. And not only that, Jordan Binnington hasn't been lights out all season either. So
yeah, I like Colorado in the goaltending matchup too.
Yeah, Grubauer has been excellent when healthy and when he's been good to play this year. So I think Colorado has it in every department over St. Louis. So I see that one going 5 games. I see Colorado winning that one in 5. This series, though, a lot of people have it billed as the most entertaining series. And not only that, but maybe the most competitive series. And I think there's definitely a strong case to be made that this will be between the Wild and the Golden Knights, especially when you look at the Wild's track record against Vegas. So they won the season series this year, 5-3, and lifetime against the Vegas Golden Knights. The Minnesota Wild are 11-5. In 16 games, they've got 11 wins. So historically, they've done well. I still like Vegas in this series, and I took Vegas in 6 games. But do you have the Minnesota Wild potentially pulling off a big upset, at least a noticeable upset against the Vegas Golden Knights?
I don't. If Vegas found a way to win the division, I think they'd be the clear-cut Stanley Cup favorites. I think they're being almost undersold at this point. I think a lot of people are sticking to their preseason pick was, the trendy one was Colorado, and I think people want to gravitate towards that. But I think Vegas, you can't say outperform because they finished with the exact same points, number of points. But I think Vegas has almost been more impressive from start to finish. They dealt with a lot of stuff. The fact that they've been reduced to 15 players on occasion, the deal, the injuries haven't been the same as Colorado, but that might be a reason why you might, prefer them a little bit more because they're coming in healthy as well. But they're going to have a little bit of they have a more difficult first round series, certainly with the Minnesota Wild. But I just think Alex Pietrangelo is starting to come into his game there. It took a little while. The last few games that I've seen out of him, he's looked absolutely outstanding. And with him and Shea Theodore playing over 30 minutes a night, if they want, like, it's going to be really difficult for teams to beat the Vegas Golden Knights, who are not going to have to worry anymore about the salary cap, which is a huge advantage for them coming down the stretch because, like, say, the Maple Leafs, they've basically been, barred or prevented from putting their best foot forward the entire season just based on the fact that the salary cap has been such an issue for them. So it's going to be a challenge. Minnesota is a legit team. They've obviously had their success against Vegas all year long, but with Marc-Andre Fleury and Robin Lehner, the ability to change it up and not skip a beat if one of them falters, I just think they're the most set team at the goaltending position, which is so important. They struggled to score enough last year, and I don't know if they've added more, but maybe they're just a different team with Alex Pietrangelo potentially helping them at least be a better transition team, not relying so much on getting the puck deep, grinding it into a paste into the corner, and then trying to get it out front for an opportunity. I think there's a bit of a different Vegas team in terms of the way they play. Last year, it was a lot of lugging in the offensive zone. This year, it's a lot of counterattacking, and I think that sets them up a little bit more for success. But the Minnesota Wild are a completely different team themselves. With Kirill Kaprizov, they turned into one of the more interesting and exciting teams in the league, and I think they can give them fits. But I think Vegas is one of 4, maybe 5 teams that can win the Stanley Cup. I don't think Minnesota's quite there yet. So I'm going with the Vegas Golden Knights in a hard-fought series that probably goes 6 games.
I've got Vegas in 6 as well. You talk about Vegas being a better team in transition. One guy who's been logging a lot of ice time with that top 6, specifically on that first line, that I think has helped that team offensively, even though he might not show up in the score sheet all the time, is Chandler Stevenson. He's got a lot of
Love
speed.
Chandler Stevenson.
He's just like a speed demon on the ice. I love watching him play too. I think, even though, like I mentioned, doesn't show up in the score sheet all the time, I think having someone that plays with a little bit of tenacity, who has that speed, can keep up with Mark Stone, who's not, the most, fastest of players, but or a guy like Max Pacioretty. I still like his presence in that group. With Minnesota, one thing that concerns me, and on surface, I wasn't overly concerned about this, but looking a little further, I think his goaltending. Cam Talbot, his numbers on the year have been great, but he doesn't own a 900 save percentage or better against any of the playoff teams in the West Division. He's got a sub 900 against every single one of those 3 teams that made the playoffs, which, no offense to the West Division, but I think as you go down the list, you have some offenses that aren't very exciting. San Jose's offense has been one of the more disappointing offenses in hockey over the last couple of years. The LA Kings really didn't get that youth injection offensive that we thought would potentially come this year. The Arizona Coyotes, just not a great offensive team in the first place. So I think, and the Anaheim Ducks, not to mention their, inabilities to put the puck in the net. So he's really feasted on some bad offenses, but has struggled when it has come to top opponents. And when you've got a tandem like Fleury and Lehner, where one guy struggles, you just go to the other guy. I just don't see it with the Wild. And I know Kaapo Kähkönen was exciting early on, but he has not been great lately.
No,
I believe
terrible lately.
Yeah, I believe I saw a study. He's given up 15 goals in his last 2 games, something like that. It's something really bad. So a little bit of a concern factor when it comes to the Wild between the pipes. I do think, and I've said this on the show all year, I think they've got the best defense, though, 1 through 6. They're rock solid on the blue line, but I think Vegas just has too much, and their biggest enemy, Vegas, has been the salary cap. No longer an issue. I like Vegas in 6.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. I think the difference probably will be goaltending in the series. But Kirill Kaprizov is incredibly dynamic, and what he brings to the team is I know maybe his best moments have come in overtime. It's not fair to paint him that picture though, because he's been just great in all situations. He should be unanimous Calder Trophy. He's been so good, and he's changed everything about this team. But even though they've had their struggles, it seems like Vegas is the perfect remedy for that. for what Minnesota does so well from an offensive perspective, it just seems like Vegas has it completely in their capabilities to shut that down. That is their strength, I think, as a team first, is their ability to just play on the right side of the puck and make things difficult for opposing teams. They played a huge game against Colorado. They outplayed Colorado on Monday night. They lost the game. That's the reason why they're in the position they're in. But they deserved to win that game, and they stepped up to the plate. It seemed in that game, they just couldn't put the puck in the net. Maybe that's ultimately what is going to be what hurts them. And I think they need Max Pacioretty to be back and healthy if they're going to get through it. But I have this feeling about Vegas this year, and I don't think Minnesota is going to be able to get in the way of that.
I'm with you. We agreed on a lot of these. I think for the most part, if you go down the list, we're pretty much, I think you took the Bolts over the Panthers, if I'm not mistaken.
I think that's the only one. And I don't feel good about that at all. I wanted to pick, I really wanted to bet against Tampa because I thought the number would be in a position where, you know, it made sense, but it's not. I think a lot of people are giving the Panthers respect, and you certainly are as well. But I feel like they can muster one. The Nikita Kucherov factor, maybe that little injection to get them there, but maybe that adrenaline wears off eventually before they can get out of the division. But who knows? Yeah, I think we're on the same page with a lot. We're not on the same page in terms of what we want to see.
No.
I mean, I just have the biases are built into me, Stevie. So the first two for me have to be Jets, Oilers, and Canadiens, Maple Leafs. That's just what I'm going to be most interested in. I know I can't appreciate the finer things like you maybe. But in terms of what I'm least interested in, I mean, I think it would have to be Predators, Hurricanes, but all of them are good. All these series are good. Avalanche Blues is probably down on the list as well. But Golden Knights Wild is going to be appointment viewing. Lightning Panthers is going to be appointment viewing. Bruins and Capitals should be, but I see a scenario where it becomes kind of non-competitive and a little bit redundant. Penguins Islanders is probably lower on the list for me, but it's going to be a really good first round. Like I've been a little bit disappointed with what we've seen in terms of races, certainly in the North Division. I mean, this was a bit of a letdown, but what's going to be at the end is a treasure trove here. We're going to get the Maple Leafs and Canadiens for the first time in our lifetimes, and it might not be all that competitive. It might be short-lived, but it's going to get the most out of two markets that are dying for something like this. It should be so much fun. And then the Oilers and Jets could just be a bonanza of scoring. Connor McDavid in meaningful games. And if what happens or what should happen does happen, we got maybe for the first time and only time ever, Austin Matthews versus Connor McDavid in a playoff series to get to the Final Four. It just could be a perfect ending. But then again, I was saying, you know, this is going to be the perfect scenario for Canadian hockey fans, and it really wasn't all that fun. So who knows?
Yeah, I agree. I'd love it. I mean, in a dream world, in a non-pandemic world, it would be so great to have fans for those Leafs Canadiens games, because both buildings, especially the Bell Center, you think about, you know, everything that goes into that rivalry. I think that would just be something to see. And no, I'm with you. I think the divisions, even though these teams have played each other a lot through the season, I think, and at sometimes as a fan, it has felt a little bit redundant to see these two teams. I remember at one point of the year, I think Arizona and St. Louis played each other 7 times in a row. It was a legitimate 7-game series in the middle of a season. I just think that all of this familiarity will breed contempt come the postseason. I believe that's a quote. So. I don't know if I butchered that quote or not, but
I think you nailed it.
All right, perfect. So I think that we'll get some great playoff hockey. We'll see teams that I don't think we'll get to the point where it'll be overcoached to the point where things will be boring. I think things are going to stay live. They're going to stay active. And especially in the American arenas, we get more fans there. I think that is only going to help add to normalize kind of the playoff atmosphere in the NHL. So that is what I'm looking forward to.
And the second round is going to be fantastic. I mean, if what we expect to happen happens, as I mentioned, McDavid Matthews in one, Pittsburgh Boston is going to be amazing if that happens. Even, you know, any iteration except for maybe the Islanders being involved is going to be highly entertaining. The Central Division, we might have two of the best teams in the entire league facing off in the second round. And then likewise in the West Division, we're going to have two of the best teams in the entire league facing off to get to the Final Four. And then all that, when they reseed and all that, that's going to be exciting as well. So I feel like the payoff is going to be here for us who've been talking about hockey all year. Certainly ones like you have been staying up so late to talk about hockey all year. The payoff is right around the corner for you, Stevie.
I can't wait. And Justin, the payoff, the wait to have you on Late Night Hockey, it was well worth it. I really appreciated having you on the show today. And before we go, let people know where they can find your great work. I know you just posted the latest episode of the Yahoo Sports NHL podcast with John Mattis. So where can people go? Where's the best spot to find your work?
Yeah, I'm going to be ramping it up for the postseason, trying to get that lunch money, or at least the lunch money I can waste on misfired bets. We are going to be doing, I have Julian McKenzie of The Athletic on weekly. I believe we're going to be shifting to Sunday nights or maybe Saturday nights, depending on where the marquee games are. And then I'm going to be going, not live, I'm going to be doing solo episodes of the podcast 4 times a week. So I'm going to be trying to do a lot of post-game stuff, just like you. We might have stolen your idea here, Stevie. So you should at least feel somewhat proud that you might have inspired some ideas. But yeah, we're going to be trying to do short hitters so that you can wake up and maybe hear a little bit about what happened the night before, trying to hit on all the series. But so the audio, Yahoo Sports Hockey Podcast, going to 5 times a week for the next 2 months. That's going to be a bit of a chore, but it'll be a lot of fun. And all my written work will be on Yahoo as well. And that's about it. I'll probably be tweeting a lot about the Maple Leafs, who may or may not, cause a complete uproar, or, maybe they get exactly what we think they can, and they get on a long playoff run that really excites everyone in the market that we're in. And maybe they'll meet the Boston Bruins again. And that would just be a dream scenario, I think, if it happens in the 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And yeah, Late Night Hockey, often oh my goodness, there we go. I just butchered it. Late Night Hockey.
We can edit it. We can edit it.
We can edit it. Go. No, you know what? No, we stay true. It's everything. We're cutting it all. It's all going out there. Late Night Hockey, often imitated, never duplicated. But if Justin Cuthbert's doing it, it's worth watching and it's worth reading. So Justin, thanks again so much for being on the show today.
Stevie, thanks for having me. Keep grinding, buddy. It's this is a tough gig, but you talk hockey long enough, you're going to get all the viewers in eventually. Late night hockey is going to be the new thing on late night television one day. And not to say it isn't now, but you know what? It's those who are married to the game, produce content, put out content all the time. They deserve respect. And whenever you need me, I'll be on with you.
I appreciate it, Justin. Thanks so much. Take care and enjoy the playoffs.